Everyone. Welcome to the Your Human Design Coach podcast, where we are all about human design in real life and application. So nice to be here with you. I'm Ashley Watkins. If this is your first time joining us, your quote for today: I was praying for a life that I was not taught to live, but for something that I had to learn. Excited to be with you here today. Our topic for this episode is the idea of the second act. I heard a couple of years ago in Julia Louis-Dreyfus's podcast, Wiser Than Me. That's right. Yep, Wiser Than Me. She interviewed Jane Fonda for the first episode of that. And I just remember being really blown away by that episode. And that's a great podcast in general. But she talked about kind of the life in 3 acts idea, and that she was in her 3rd act and doing some reflection on what that meant to her. I was reminded of that episode recently when I was listening to an episode of Audra Donnell's podcast, A Lot with Audra. Audra is a local Wichita, Kansas entrepreneur, founder of The Thread. And she recently started the 2nd season of her podcast. And she was saying how that was kind of her focus. She's getting ready to turn 40. And originally kind of thinking about it as the second half, but moving into this vocabulary of the second act. So the idea of the second act appealed to me to talk about through the lens of human design because of the line 6. We've mentioned the 6 here before. It's also sometimes called the role model. And we had an Ask Ashley episode not too long ago. I think it was episode 5, where we talked about the 6 and kind of what it's about. But let me just give you a quick overview before I move into looking at it specifically through this lens of the second act. The thing that makes me very interested in it is this idea that life is in 3 acts, essentially. So from age 0 to 30, those with the 6 in their profile number, they're experimenting. They're learning. It may feel like a series of mistakes. Again, human design, never prescriptive or predictive. So that doesn't resonate with you and you have a 6. You don't have to take that, but it may. And then from 30 to 50, those with the 6 profile line are kind of pulling back. And let me look at the story of the last 30 years and kind of take that bird's eye view of that and think about how, what's the wisdom to be gained there. And then 50 plus is really stepping into that role model, integrating the wisdom, learning, and now we're off. And again, I've said this before, but sometimes people go, well, so not till 50, nothing happens till 50. And to that, I would say no, but it's just going to keep getting better. People will recognize you more and more for that kind of innate wisdom and that ability to be objective the older you get. There are 4 possible profile number combinations that involve the 6. You can have a 3-6, and this is going to look like a fraction. So a 3/6, a 4/6, a 6/2, and a 6/3. The information I'm sharing here today, I tried to pull in when we talk about application from a few different places. So some of these stories deal with clients that I work with. Some are people that I know, my family, friends. And then some, I belong to a community called Human Design Genius, which is with Erin Claire Jones. And so some were pulled from examples in that. I also want to recommend a book here. Robin Wynn, we've talked about a little bit, but she wrote a book called Understanding Profiles in Human Design. That's been really helpful to me. We'll talk a little bit about this at the end, but the profile line is something that, as you live your human design, becomes more and more meaningful. And really, I think of it as aligning with the purpose. What are we here to do? Who are we here to be and show up as to, benefit the world in our own unique way? The second act conversation is also interesting to me personally. I'm in my mid-40s, and so I would say I'm in my second act, and I don't have a 6 in my profile line, but I do feel like my life just keeps getting better, and a lot of that is because of my integration of my human design and understanding of that. So, it's a meaningful topic. All right, so let's start with the 3-6. So we'll talk a little bit about how these numbers play together. When you have the 3-6, the 3 being about experimentation, and the first 30 years of the 6 being about experimentation, and have that real experimentation flow and theme through this person's life. Often the 3-6 is seeking truth. And the thing here, as we get into the second act, there may be some tension because the 3 wants to jump in. But remember, in that 30 to 50, the 6 is kind of pulling back and observing. And so I think that's something to be aware of. We'll talk about some examples of that. But in relationships, it's helpful for those with this number to have the ability to explore and kind of experiment in their lives. That doesn't necessarily have to mean an open relationship, but exploring in ways that feel empowering to them, whether that's career or interests and self-discovery, but also having stability. So I think that kind of sums up the 3-6. So if we think about somebody with the 3-6 and they're in the second act, so for the 6 being the 30 to 50, they are working on integrating that wisdom. But we also think about, I don't know about you, but as I get older, you're like, oh, wow, I'm an adult and people expect me to act and know as such. So an example that I wanted to look at was someone with this 3-6 line sort of saying, I am struggling with using my voice. I want to market my business and I want to do it in a way that feels confident and natural to me, but I feel a fear. And what could that be? If it's all about experimentation kind of leading to knowledge, and we've got the double experimentation because we have the 3 as well. So a thought here for someone who's saying, I'm struggling to use my voice, I'm feeling fear. What about speaking from what you've experienced or what you've learned rather than feeling that you have to speak from where you know? I can speak from my 3 line and say, that's helpful to me. Sometimes when there's a pressure like, but how do you know? I can get a little, oh, but I've done it. I've experimented. I've learned it. I may not have a master's or a doctorate in it, but I can tell you what I've learned and what I've done. And really, when we think about purpose, that's the wisdom that these numbers can bring there. So with that 3-6, sharing at first from that kind of perspective of this is what I've learned and experienced, and then adding on to the knowledge, but maybe giving yourself some freedom from the pressure there. The second profile number that has the 6 line, the 4-6. The 4 being all about community, kind of finding that balance of being with others and being with self, but really gifted at building and maintaining and being part of community. There's this feeling of being content with themselves, but also seeking connection and intimacy. There may be a more subtle leadership here. So the role model is not necessarily like out and vocal and getting in there, but they are a quiet, constant presence there. It's solid. And they really are shining here when we think about community, when they bring this wisdom and start to kind of share in the second act to their specific network or community. When we talk about the experimentation piece, the 4 kind of adds to the 6 that they are here to really explore, what does my process look like? Not necessarily the way that others do it. In the second act, especially if we think about nearing the end of the second act. So in this case with the 4-6, I want to talk a little bit about being a projector with this number. So we remember that the projectors, for their strategy, they are waiting for the invitation. As they get towards the end of the second act, getting ready to kind of embody this wisdom, there's going to be probably a certain sense of excitement there. If it's a projector, the 4-6, and they're feeling like, I'm ready to go, but maybe the invitations aren't coming, of remembering that the waiting, the paying attention to where the energy feels good and doing more of that, things you're already doing, can really set you up for new opportunities that are bigger than what you could have even imagined. So I think there's some trust here for the 4-6, in this time, because they have that kind of solid energy, leaning into that and being patient with knowing that the right opportunities will come. I can also speak to this. I have someone that I'm close with that has the 4-6. And this person was, when I gave that little disclaimer at the top and I said, 0 to 30 may feel like a lot of mistakes, but if that doesn't resonate with you, you can let it go. He was like, well, I don't think I made endless mistakes from 0 to 30. I was like, absolutely not. And he's 50. So he's actually into his 50s. So he's out of the second act. And he has had the chance to integrate those lessons learned from 0 to 30. So in 30 to 50, knowing him during that time, I saw him saying, I won't do it that way again. And he spent a lot of time from 30 to 50 of saying, what are my personal ways that these things work? Becoming very content with himself, being able to become that kind of solid person, because I'm really trying to integrate and say, I've learned these lessons and how can they serve me? And now that he's in his 50s, like, oh my gosh, bringing wisdom to the network, finding those relationships, being a leader, it's absolutely evident. So seeing him in that second act of really the integration looks like, I'm going to do it my way and I'm going to learn. That's the beauty to me of the 4-6. All right, 6-2. We talked about this one quite a bit in episode 5. This is the 2 being the hermit. So we've got the role model hermit. So again, a balance of, I want to be in my own energy. I need to recharge, but I need to, let myself be around people so my gifts can emerge. That's kind of the 2. And then the 6 is the natural gift of the leader, the role model, being able to look at the big picture. They're very gifted at this, do their own thing. But there is that sometimes introverted inclination, sometimes wanting to hide a little bit, but wise, and people are seeking them out for their wisdom. One other thing about the 6 is that are kind of looking for their soulmate, but the 6-2 is like, I'm really looking for my soulmate, but I really have to trust that person. And when trust is broken for the 6-2, it can be very damaging. So again, in the second act, the 30 to 50. So this will shift us, because when we talked about it in episode 5, that we were looking at someone who was in their mid-20s, so still in that first act. But I have a dear friend that is a 6-2, and she is approaching 40. And I've known her for the last almost 6 years. When I ran her chart and learned she had the 6-2, I was like, huh, interesting, because absolutely I see her in that wisdom. But I would say where it stands out for me with her is she's been in these kind of challenging work environments of some drama, some gossip, some interesting interpersonal things. So not dissimilar to what we talked about in episode 5, but being able to rise above, do her own thing, look at the big picture. And I think she would say that maybe from 0 to 30, the way she kind of bounced around and did and tried and did different things has helped her to integrate and work on integrating that wisdom and kind of being able to step back. And I've seen her transition in her career path. And every transition she makes, it's even more like, oh yeah, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. And the wisdom that is able to come through, the way that the people in her work, even those that are older than her considerably, look to her for that is really inspiring. I wonder if it could be an empowering process for someone who has the 6-2 to kind of keep a diary of this second act, to really reflect, because if we're thinking about what are the lessons learned and how do we integrate, and then seeing that lived story come alive as you enter into your 50s and into your third act, I think there could be some empowerment there. So that's a thought on the 6-2. Okay, so 6-3. We got the flip of the 3-6. And I believe I've mentioned this before, but with your profile number, the number that comes first is usually what you're more conscious of, and then the second number may be more unconscious. And for the 6-3, it's about really living their uniqueness. Maybe some bouncing around, may not feel smooth for a lot of it, but the resiliency that happens, through the transformation is really a strength of the 6-3. So having a lot of different experiences, but the resiliency carries them through it. Some reflection from a 6-3 who is still in the second act and really kind of like do TikTok. We know that like a manifesting generator, their not self-signature is impatience. So imagine being a manifesting generator and then having the 6 and you're like 50. But remember, it's always getting better. Reflections that this person shared. I'm really just trying to lean into the energy of the day and explore and trust that what comes next is meant exactly for me. So putting kind of a button on reflecting on the 6, but I wonder for those who are the 6 of framing this second act, it's an experiment. What exciting thing is on the way? How can you lean into your joy during this time? How can you trust the process, surrender to the unknown, and then how will you step into your role model era? I resonate with the second act. I loved really Audrey's reflections, Jane Fonda's reflections, I think were great. But for the 6, when there is this feeling of the best is yet to come, exciting, but sometimes makes you feel impatient, question might be, how can I frame this time as an adventure? And how can I call to the universe to deliver whatever comes next to me with that same spirit and that same energy? I think that's an empowering way to look at it. I'd love to hear from any of you with 6s in your profile and how that's sitting with you. One last thought before we close. We've talked a lot about the strengths. There are always, kind of shadow or ways to look at like room for growth. It's come up already a bit, but strategy and authority are still key. Oh my gosh, here we are again. Always comes back to the authority. But especially for the 6, when we think about having the aligned opportunities, the right opportunities, and then knowing how to respond. We heard a little bit of reflection of like, I'm a projector, I have to wait for the invitation, but my 50th birthday is coming and I'm ready already. But not forgetting that that is your strategy and trusting that the right things will come. It may be I'm a generator, I have a sacral or trust your gut authority, and I'm in this second act, I'm about halfway through, and I just feel like, I'm ready. Like the lessons, it's enough, but are you checking in with the gut? Are you giving yourself more things to respond to? If you feel like, I don't know, I'm just not, I feel like this is it. So always coming back to strategy and authority. There's a reason why in my introductory human design sessions that we spend a whole session on type, strategy, and authority, because unless you feel pretty aligned with type, strategy, and authority, doesn't mean you have to be doing it perfectly. I don't do it perfectly, but unless that's feeling kind of in alignment, the rest is it's just like a parlor trick to learn. I was reading this in Robin Wynn's book. She said, I caution people on trying to learn too much too quickly because it's all really interesting. But why are we here on this podcast talking about what it looks like in life? Because that's where it comes alive. And to live your type, strategy, and authority and feel that you are aligned, then the rest has a chance to bloom. Then the purpose becomes clearer because we know we're attracting the right opportunities and we know how to respond when they come. If we're still trying to figure that out, then it's really great that, I'm a 6 and I'm supposed to be this role model, but if I'm chasing opportunities or I'm not listening to my gut, it may be harder to do that. So just remember strategy and authority. As always, send me any questions you may have for a future episode. Working on our first conversation episode with a live guest, hoping to hear from her about her experiences with human design and maybe do just a little light live coaching for you all. So keep an eye out for that. Trying to get myself together. I jumped into this and then I'm like, oh, I want to do that. Yes. The opportunity came up. My gut said yes. And I'm like, okay, got to figure that out. So I'm working on that, but should be coming soon. And as always, take care of yourself and we'll see you next time.